Sergei Nikolaevich Yuran was born in 1969 in the town of Lugansk, nowadays Ukraine, but at the time part of the Soviet Union. His father worked as a driver and his mother worked as a school cook. And according to his account, like many in the Soviet republics, they lived in near poverty. His free time was mostly spent either playing football or doing some kind of other activity that didn't involve really going to school. And after finishing the sixth grade, he entered into a physical education school, a bit against his parents' will. At only 16, he joined Zorya Voroshilovgrad, a team that is nowadays called Zorya Luhansk and plays in the Ukrainian top flight. At the time were a team in the mid-table of the second Soviet division, and that had some glory days in the 70s, mainly in 1972 when they won their only title of the top Soviet League. He's, as of today, the youngest player ever to start in the first team. And in 1985, he led Zorya to promotion to the top flight of the Soviet Union, where they had been in the 70s already. His success and the team's success gave him the first call to the Soviet national team in an under-17 tournament. This tournament that took place in Italy showed for the first time a bit of his aggressiveness when he broke both legs of an Argentinian player who had previously spat on him. Already in 1986, he caught the eye of the Dynamo Kiev team that was at the time by far the most successful club in the Soviet League. But he initially decided to refuse his offer and not leave Zorya. In 1987, Dynamo insisted, and despite also CSKA's interest, he joined the team of Kiev. The first 2 seasons were mostly played in the reserve team, and in fact his career was almost cut short by collision in a game against the Torpedo Moscow reserves that saw him breaking his ankle. Against all odds, and after 2 surgeries, Yuran recovered fully, and following a short period in a military camp, he started to play regularly for the second team of Dynamo Kiev, and finally in 1990 he established himself in the first team by creating a perfect attacking partnership with his colleague, Oleg Salenko. He had a brilliant game against Spartak Moscow that year, which contributed a lot to Dynamo Kiev winning the Soviet title once more, and this quickly became a star. It was that year still that he was called for the national team, the senior one, for the first time. While the Soviet Union was already cracking at this time, 1990, 1991, some good exhibitions in the European Cup, now the Champions League, and most notably in the game against Barcelona, many foreign clubs started to poach Yuran. And Benfica was actually the club that paid the most, so Yuran signed for them in 1991. He recalls at that time that he already had everything set to sign with Liverpool, but the last minute Benfica made a significantly bigger offer money-wise, and his agent accepted on his behalf, even without him knowing. But when it came to time to sign the contract, Benfica agents came with a bucket of cash, around $50,000. And he thought that this was some kind of scam, given that at the time in the Soviet Union you could not have hard currency at hand. It was only after 2 hours of calls with the agent and Benfica emissaries that he finally signed the deal. It was in Portugal that he really got unveiled to the world. Despite not having won the first league title of Portugal until the season of 93-94, he shined brightly in the European Cups, especially in the 1991-92 European run that saw Benfica reaching a later stage and he becoming the European Cup, nowadays Champions League, top scorer together with another star at the time, Jean-Pierre Papin. Although for him in the football field things looked great, for Benfica itself the lack of the league title was enough to let coach Sven-Goran Eriksson go, and the arrival of another coach, Tomislav Ivic, changed the scenario for Yuran as well as for another two Russians that had joined him in the team, Mostovoy and Kulkov. Kulkov, who was a dear friend of Yuran and who died recently in 2020 during the COVID pandemic. Critics to this new coach Ivic, conflicts with the defender Moser, as well as rumors of too much partying and drugs, led to fines, and with Benfica in a complicated financial position, Yuran almost left to Newcastle that season. This actually never happened, but Tony, the next coach, recalls that the trio Russian players was quite a handful. They were very talented, but he recalls that the nightlives were an issue, and that one instance, the club doctor had to go to their home to pick up Yuran, who was falsely complaining that he had a fever after a night out. Yuran had already played for the under-21 Soviet national team in the under-21 Euro Championship earlier that year, that ended up actually in a title against another talented team of Yugoslavia in the final. This was not his first appearance in the senior team, which was in a friendly against Israel in 1990, but he ultimately helped the team to qualify for the Euro 92, that due to the dissolution of the Soviet Union saw Yuran play in the CIS team, Commonwealth of Independent States. It was nevertheless a disappointing participation, not getting out of the group stage with 2 draws and 1 loss, and actually no goals scored by Yuran. In 1993, there was a arrival of a new coach in Benfica, Artur Jorge, someone that had gotten a lot of titles in France with PSG, and despite conquering the Portugal Cup and the league, this saw the trio of Russian players being left behind by the preferences of this new coach, who liked more Portuguese and Brazilian players than anything else. So in 1994, both Yuran and Kulkov were released, and they went, quite surprisingly, to a club that is only 300 kilometers north, the big rivals Porto, who were under Bobby Robson and had a style that was much better fit for Yuran as a player. Contrary to other players, he was never really hated in Lisbon, and when he scored for Porto in the Estádio da Luz, he was applauded by the Benfica fans, something that even José Mourinho, at the time working under Bobby Robson in Porto, described as something never seen before. Yuran recalled in an interview about his childhood that if he had not become a football player, he would be a driver like his father. So it's not a surprise that driving fast cars was his passion. But on a night in November 1994, he was involved in a car accident at night in Porto. This was the last straw for the club, who moved him back to Russia next season. That said, Yuran still remembers fondly his time in Portugal and concedes that he was a bit over the top. Coming out of a completely different reality of the Soviet Union, he took freedoms way too far. In the meantime, despite being a born Ukrainian, he decided to represent Russia upon the fall of the Soviet Union for the qualification of the USA 94 World Cup. Despite an easy group, given that Yugoslavia had withdrew for a similar situation of the disintegration as the Soviet Union, Russia only managed to classify in the second place behind Greece, with whom they lost the last game. The coach, Sadirin, blamed the players for the loss, and that combined with the Reebok sponsorship that had not been discussed with the players and other structural issues around the national team, being a good example that on the training camp in Novogorsk, they had the heat turned off, which made all the players have to sleep with their coats on in a very, very cold winter night. So this group of players, 14 of them including Yuran, created a ladder fighting for the dismissal of the coach, improvement of the conditions, and monetary bonuses. Almost a year of struggle between this group of players, who also included stars like Kanchelskis or Karpin, and the Russian Federation ended up in an ultimatum that either the players accepted the current coach or they would not be in the squad for the World Cup of '94. In the end, Yuran and another 6 players gave in, but the performance in the World Cup was disappointing. After losses against Brazil and Sweden, Yuran had another fallout with Sadirin and was sent home packing. Even prior to the last game, when Salenko scored 5 goals in a 6-1 win against Cameroon, which had absolutely no impact in the elimination of the Russians. At this time, Yuran was already marked as inconsistent, a party guy, and 1 year in Spartak Moscow in the season of 95 was probably a bad move. The poor management of the team, a wild East economy that was rampant in Russia at the time, local gangster involvement, etc., made that despite a successful football season in Europe, where Spartak actually won the 6 group games of the Champions League, it was only a question of time before the club faced heavy financial issues. This combined with the fact that Yuran had fallen in love with a woman called Ludmila, who would become his third wife, and that this person lived in England, was enough to see him move to Millwall. Again, this was just a short stint at the club, who went from the top of English Division 1, nowadays a championship, to being relegated in just 5 months. Truth be told, Yuran had been indicated to Millwall's manager at the time, Mick McCarthy, by Bobby Robson, but Mick left shortly after for a job post in the national team of the Republic of Ireland, and this was probably not the most favorable time for Yuran also. In 1996, he was again without a club, so he went back to Moscow and did start to receive some offers, mostly from Germany. And he ended up signing for Fortuna Düsseldorf. The first season in Germany was when his first child was born, and despite the team getting relegated, Yuran was one of the best players of the squad, and after this season he signed a 4-year deal with Bochum. His form, including games in the European competitions, saw him place once more in the national team, but again he was involved in another case, caught in 1996 driving under the influence by German police. He had his driver's license revoked and his contract terminated. Bochum went on to being relegated that season, and upon hearing this news already back in Russia, Yuran sent congratulations as a telegram to Topmüller, the manager that in the end had the decision to terminate his contract. 1999 saw his return to Spartak Moscow, but already pushing 30, he struggled and he only scored 3 goals that season. This, together with complaints about his slow pace, made manager Oleg Romanchev decide to sell him the next winter break. So in the 2000, he reached his last stage of his career in his last club at Sturm Graz, at the time Austrian champions. Yuran still played that season, 26 games, scoring 6 goals, but in a league game against Lask Linz, he fractured his skull and he could not recover from this injury. So he finished his playing days at just the age of 31. Having always showed some interest to become a coach, Yuran soon entered Spartak Moscow's youth academy as a coach, and then later, in 2003, he became the assistant coach of Andrei Chernyshov in the senior team. The results for the team were not good that season, so the whole coaching staff was duly fired, and Yuran, after this, managed to grab his first lead position as a coach at Almaz Moscow, a team in the 4th tier of the Russian pyramid. His work caught the eye of Dynamo Stavropol, who on the 3rd tier was mounting a challenge for promotion, but disaster struck again, as even with Yuran achieving the title, it was discovered that the club had a 16 million ruble debt and therefore could not get a license for the 2nd division of Russian football. Without the will to continue in his failed project, Yuran got another offer from a Latvian side, FC Ditten, newly promoted to the 1st tier, but this was also short-lived, as the team had, again, problems paying wages and Yuran had to resign. He did not go far. He basically went to the country next door, as he took over TVMK, a rather unsuccessful Estonian 1st division team. But still in less than 1 season, he managed to grab a cup title in a final against the main club of the country at the time, Flora Tallinn. This meant that he had proven himself, so he received a call back from Russia to manage Shinnik Yaroslav, chief promotion to the Premier League. This he managed to do, but his first stint in the Premier League was short-lived, only 4 months, as he was fired due to poor performance of the team. Still, Khimki saw something in him, a team that was placed last when he was fired from his previous job, decided that he was the man for the job to save them from relegation. And in the end he did, but the club was not really convinced by the end of the season, so they decided to hire someone else. Financial problems seemed to follow Yuran everywhere, and next season he went to Kazakhstan and then to Azerbaijan and then back to Russia following a stint in Armenia. Strangely enough, during that period, he had a small part in a Russian TV series called Offside, about a young football player trying to make it at Lokomotiv Moscow. His luck only changed shortly, a decade later, when thanks to a pause due to the COVID-19 of the Russian league, he got Khimki promoted in his second time managing the team. This also again did not last long, and yet, after a disagreement with the club's board, he was sacked, only to come back a third time to the team 1 year later and to be sacked again later on. His last post was at Pari Nizhny Novgorod, which did not last until the end of the season despite managing not to get relegated again from the Russian Premier League. Making him no favors is also the fact that although born Ukrainian, he had recent comments about the war where he mentioned that Ukraine had a lot of Nazis as well as other pro-Russian stands, by not understanding why Bosnia and Herzegovina would not want to play against the Russian national team. In the end, Yuran did not have an amazing career, at least not as he had promised when he was young. For the national team, both Soviet Union, CIS or Russia, the only title that he got was a under 21 European Championship, although you have to admit that this was also a complicated time for these national teams with the fall of communism and perestroika. In terms of clubs, well, with Dynamo Kiev, he got a Soviet top league, USSR Cup, and then Portugal, he probably had the best of times with 2 Portuguese leagues, one with Porto and the other one with Benfica, a Portuguese Cup, but after that, it was just one Russian league with Spartak Moscow, where, to be honest, he was not really the main figure anymore. Individually, he was Ukrainian Footballer of the Year in 1990, the first time that this award was given, as a Ukraine, as a national identity, and he was the 1992 Champions League or European Cup top scorer. But somehow you always think that if this had come at a different time, at the time that Yuran was not coming from a country that was in a turmoil into a completely free market, he probably would have had a better career.